having a massive research investment in a company which is very risk averse on the one hand, but does see the potential of this technology and is willing to invest in it. But primarily how we're taking like a huge unknown investment and breaking it down to something that is not only digestible by corporate leaders, but also a process that feeds itself over time. This is in the GenBI space, so we will dive a little bit into the architecture and considerations of how we're building GenBI. There is an optional, more technical deep dive. I think we'll spend maybe 20, 25 minutes kind of going through the strategy. We'll see what questions we have, and then we can decide if we want to take that deep dive into the technical areas. If not, happy to follow up with anyone offline and kind of talk more kind of geeky tech stuff. In addition to doing my role at Northwestern Mutual, I'm also doing some consulting, advisory boards, and I'm starting my own thing these days. So hoping that that's going to mature and I can share with this group when the time comes. So let's get started. First of all, what is GenBI? It is a fusion of GenAI and business intelligence. Generally speaking, the problem space is how do we automate a process of technical and business stakeholders who are reaching out to BI teams and try to automate at least some of the more straightforward Q&A that happens on a daily basis. It's really about delivering scale, speed, and efficiency at this point in time, and generally enabling data democratization so that more people across the company can access the data that they need in an efficient way. It is not, at this point in time, a way for us to introduce superhuman intelligence into data analytics. It is definitely something that is a visionary outlook for us. But at this point in time, it's more about automating the more mundane processes. And there are really four main big barriers that we encountered when we set out on this journey. So the first one, and I guess like the obvious, is that this is really unknown tech, right? So no one has really done this until now. I would say kind of the last year, there have been a number of vendors like Amazon and Databricks and a few others that have introduced capabilities, but no one has really been able to produce a kind of fully fledged GenBI agent that can do the work start to finish. So it is a very unknown space. The data itself is obviously messy. Anyone who's worked for a medium company who's been around, I'd say, for more than 3 years can appreciate how data can be super messy and very hard for us to introduce into any structured process. But still, we wanted to make sure that we are using the actual data and not just simulated data from our experience in building other demos, right? And noting how easy it might be to stand up a demo, but where the rubber meets the road is really when you try to take a GenAI application to production, and you very quickly realize that reality is not something that is easily synthesized. We do have a lot of experience with that kind of blind trust bias, right? So even if we are able to produce something that appears to be magical and people are willing to use it, we know that behind the scenes, it's very hard for us to harden these systems, secure them, and make them accurate. And so it is hard for us to even measure the accuracy, and we've done some work to try and tackle that. And lastly, on budget and impact, right? So building GenBI agents is a huge undertaking, and it requires a lot of man hours and investment. And I don't know about you, but last time that I got like a blank check for $1 million to do whatever I want from management, I woke up from that dream and I realized that that's not how companies work. We can't just ask for budget and assume that we get it, but we really have to show ROI and preferably show it in an incremental way and not just kind of take up a full year to do research and then who knows what happens at the end of the line. So I will start with the kind of data elements because that was the step number one for us. The tech, as I said, is going to come at the end of the talk. So you are definitely able to expect that. But really, from a leadership perspective, how I guess like the message or the story that I want to share is how we were able to even get the senior leadership of the company to invest in such an endeavor, right? And keep in mind, Northwestern Mutual is not a product company. It's not a big tech company. It's not in our DNA to build products that solve a generic problem in the world. We need to deliver business outcomes for our business. And so researching just kind of a generic capability is not something that is generally something that's easy for us to get across the industry. Step number one was really understanding what data we're going to use and which areas in the company we want to apply this to. It was very clear to us that from day one, we're going to have to solve an actual business problem that we have and not make one up. And the one that we decided to choose was the servicing analytics area. So this is a specific area that gets a lot of focus in the company. And the BI team that works in the servicing department spends about 80% of their time just answering the same questions all over again, right? So different people coming in different times asking for the same questions. And in many cases, it's the exact same questions, but sometimes it's just slight variations on information that's already available, but it's not available in the precise view or context that that specific stakeholder asks for. And so when we started working with that team and diving into their data, it gave us a lot of benefit like from day one. So benefit number one is that when you are working with real data and an actual team was trying to solve a real problem, the data is already there, and there is some evidence or some ground truth as to what's the right way of using that data, right? Because the servicing BI team has been creating reports and dashboards and answering ad hoc questions for years now. So they know their data, they know what their stakeholders are asking for, and they have a lot of examples they can share with us, right? Examples like, this is a query that we would run to pull some type of data. This is the relevant data to answer some types of questions. And this is how we articulate an answer to a variety of business queries that we get from the company. So right off the bat, we had a good baseline of data. We had a good baseline of ground truth, which is basically how to leverage that data. And we had a library of actual questions that the business is interested in. In addition, by working with that specific team, we had the subject matter expertise of that team that can give us rapid feedback and allow us to experiment and figure out how to improve the system in an incremental way. Now, the biggest challenge, obviously, was that we were working with actual data of the company. It's very sensitive data. It has employee information, client information. And so what we did is kind of very naively, we took that data out, we masked it, we put it in a sandbox, and that also allowed us to experiment with some of the latest models that exist from different vendors like OpenAI and Claude, instead of trying to fix or solve a problem in a kind of a semi-production environment where we are more limited by how much data we can access and what are the kind of approved architecture or approved stack that we can leverage. So that's on the data side. And once we started working with that data and learning the kind of challenges that the servicing team encounter, we very quickly saw that there is actually a wide variety of personas that they interact with. So there's the analysts themselves who work with the data on a day-to-day basis. They know the data very well, but they may not always understand the business context. There are managers and frontline people who have tactical needs of how to leverage that data, but very different perspectives, right, of what they care about and how they want to use the data and how they want to pull it. And then at the end of the line, there are the executives, right, who want to get like high-level information. They want to get it like in a very summarized way, in a very, very specific format. And they have very little patience for inaccuracies. They have very little attention span to learning something new, and they just want to get their answers here and there. The challenge, though, is that each one of these different personas have very different biases in terms of how they might interact with an automated tool that helps them access and understand data. And so on a very high level, the types of biases that we encountered, some of them are not very new, right? But we had to recognize them in the context of building an application that people actually use, right? And many of these are very familiar, right? Like ChatGPT or Claude can be very confident and fluent, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're accurate. They're very responsive and being able to give us very detailed information, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they think through the actual problem and try to understand our context. They can give us a lot of details, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are intelligently exploring the problem and trying to match the outcome with the actual context. And obviously, as we all know, they can be very, very verbose, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they truly understand the context and are experts in that area. Having said that, all of these are biases that we as humans possess. They're very hard for us to let go of. And eventually, they cause us to trust the experience more than we should. And I think a lot of us have experienced that in the recent couple of years working with this type of technology. That's very hard for us to train ourselves not to trust the data or how to be critical about the information that we get. And as we saw, the different personas experience these biases in very different ways. And our ability to mitigate those gaps is critical for us to be able to provide a successful and accurate experience to the business. Now, lastly, and this is very interesting, the fact that I, as a data and AI leader, deploy a GenBI agent to production and start evangelizing it and telling people, hey, come to our application if you want to get access to data, automatically makes them assume that I know what I'm doing and that I gave them a super high accurate system to use. So just by me putting that system in that position, they assume that the system has proficiency. But that's not always the case. I can't always give them a system that is 100% accurate. And that, again, is something that we have to mitigate in terms of the experience. Now, to be able to build trust, first and foremost with senior leadership, and then eventually with every one of the personas that we're using, we have to take a few measures and really build those incrementally over time. So one thing kind of off the bat, we said, we can't just use production data. I think that's obvious to everyone. We took it to a sandbox and did a lot of work to mask that. The second element was that crawl, walk, run approach, which is an approach that's relevant to a lot of research projects. In our case, that translated to starting out with the kind of core group, which is very, very data savvy, okay? So the subject matter experts who, when they see a mistake, can pick up on it very quickly. And in that case, we are lowering the risk of people misusing the data that they get, and we're also creating a feedback loop for ourselves, which fuels the process moving forward. Only then did we deploy that to managers who can probably be as critical as the analysts, but they don't have as much patience. They don't have as much attention span, and they do want to get results more quickly and expect higher level of accuracy from the system. And we're not even looking at deploying that directly to executives, right? And maybe that's not even going to come down the line. It depends on where exactly we find the best match for the capabilities and how we decide to activate those. The third element is that we understood that the journey to a full-fledged GenBI agent is going to be a very long one. But there are incremental steps along the way that can allow us to create value and bring that back to the enterprise even before we get to that, visionary state, and maybe we'll never get there. And the way that we did this is by actually basing the experience on certified content, certified reports, and in a way referring to that data instead of creating that on the spot. So this is a type of a RAG experience, if you think about it. We are taking certified information, and instead of drafting the report or dashboard on the fly, we're actually finding the relevant report, and we're forwarding or referencing the person to that report or giving them extracts out of that report. And eventually, I think we're all aware of this. Expectation alignment is key. And this is something that we had to communicate up front. We're not looking to create that kind of replacement for a BI person. We are looking to cut 80% of what we call kind of the lookup drudgery, right? So just that day-to-day work that is all about, taking existing information and just distributing that to the right people in the right format. The main big challenge when we designed this project was figuring out how we are actually reducing the limit, right? Reducing the risk that we're taking on, reducing the unknowns, and being able to deliver incremental value. So the way that we structured that was in kind of a stepwise process, and each one of these steps had a business value on its own, and it also help contribute to the next step by creating feedback and creating a knowledge base that help us fuel the next piece of the process. So step number one was really kind of exploratory, natural language to SQL, response generation, figuring out how to activate the technology. And that immediately led us to the understanding that for an LLM to be able to understand a business question, translate that to a data query, and then return a response, which is, again, in a business language, we had to create metadata and context. But immediately came the question, what metadata do we need? How much of the metadata do we need? And what does good metadata look like? Now, if you've been in the data space for a while, you know that that is a question that we ask ourselves all the time, whether or not an LLM is part of the process, right? Because also for human beings to be able to access the data, be able to use the data and know exactly what's the right way of using that data, metadata and context, right, documentation is really key for us to be able to leverage data in an accurate way. So when we did this kind of metadata research sprint, that was in light of what an LLM needs to function best, but we immediately saw that those learnings can be applied directly to our data catalogs, right? And we actually have like a semantic layer initiative that's going on in the company right now. And this white paper that we wrote about what is good metadata in a very quantifiable way was immediately effective in helping us define what does the semantic layer need to hold, right? And what are the standards that we want to hold ourselves accountable when we're creating data catalogs? And what are the standards that we need to hold the data producers in terms of describing the data that they generate and how the rest of the enterprise can leverage that? At that point in time, we actually expanded the ability for us to not only ask questions about one specific schema or database, but an understanding that when you ask a question in a business context, sometimes the data comes from multiple sources. So a multi-context semantic search agent was built to be able to identify where the right data exists and how do we bring it in and join it together. Now, if you've done any kind of natural language to SQL, you know that the join function is one of the hardest ones for an LLM to figure out. In this context, first of all, understanding what data to join and how to join it, and not only in the context of which foreign keys to use, but also understanding which columns in two different tables are actually related to one another and in what way. That is a hugely complex problem that we're still trying to kind of refine, but that is key to be able to unlock any kind of natural language to SQL capability. Now, if you think about it, that problem of finding the right data and understanding how two pieces of data relate to one another, again, is a problem that exists in any data space, whether or not you're trying to put an LLM into the process. And so the business outcome from this research sprint was actually a Slack bot that we built where a business stakeholder or technical can come in and say, I need information about our sales funnel. And the bot would go out, apply that action, and come back and say, these are the 2 or 3 data sets that you may want to go into, and here are the people who own them. So you can reach out to those people, and they can help you figure out how to leverage that data. Now, it may seem surprising to some, but apparently, this one very simple action of what data exists and who are the owners accounted for about 20% of the ticket volume for the servicing BI team. So if you think about it, 1 in every 5 questions was just, what data do you have? And when we built this data bot, we basically almost, overnight eliminated this call volume or ticket volume to the BI team and immediately allowed them to use that time for doing something else. The next phase was about representation and visualization. This is kind of where we are right now. We're still trying to figure this out, but the goal for this phase was to understand, once I get the data and I understand how to join it and how to query it, how do I then represent it back to the user? And this is both on how do I articulate a business answer, as well as, if I want to show charts, if I want to pivot the data in any way, if the user wants to create some kind of segmentation and views of that data. So this is really about, once I have a data extract, how do I allow the user to manipulate that? Now, this again, even though it's part of kind of a multi-step process, can be directly used to create an application that helps users, once they find the data, or even if they are already in some kind of an existing report, be able to interact with that report with natural language. So this is the kind of stuff that companies like Power BI and kind of all the rest of those kind of BI platforms, that's the stuff that they're building into their platforms right now. And we've experimented with some of those, but we've seen very quickly that if you are just the platform and you pull in the data, it is very hard for you to do the pivoting right if you don't have this metadata and context layer, and if you don't fully understand how to join multiple pieces of data. So if you try that out in whatever BI platform that you have and were disappointed by that, it's probably because that BI platform lacks this context, and therefore it is very hard for it sometimes to figure out what exactly you mean when you say, can you show me the results of the last 3 quarters, right? Or tell it, show me only, the North American sales team, something like that. Last one is kind of really a role-based fine-tuning. So depending on who's asking the question, we may want to approach the process slightly differently. And eventually, like in this kind of 1.5-year long roadmap, hopefully we'll get to that holy grail of the GenBI edge and delivered. But the point is that even if we don't get there, we have so many incremental steps, and each one of them can create some kind of a direct business impact. So the benefits that we got from creating this kind of step-by-step roadmap is, first of all, that we are able to deliver value very early, and we're able to deliver that often. And so when we show this back to management, not only do they actually realize some ROI from their investment, but it gives them the confidence that we're on the right track and that they're getting some ROI, even if not the full project promise is not going to be realized. We are able to show transparent progress, so it's not the kind of thing where we're going out for a year and no one knows what's coming out. And maybe in a year we'll come with something, maybe not, which obviously creates a lot of anxiety with managers. Incremental business value is something that doesn't only yield direct business impact, but also fuels the next research phase. And if you think about it, this is kind of a very startup approach, right? So for a startup, it's very clear to see that we need to get money all the time coming in. We need to get more input to validate that we're on the right track. But when you're an enterprise company, you don't always think in that way, but it's still the right approach to take, right? So each step of the way needs to fuel the next one and show that you're actually making progress. That's also part of the adaptive learning, right? We get a lot of feedback throughout the process that helps us improve. And on that point, everything we've learned throughout the process can help us in making a lot of business decisions. One of those business decisions can be, maybe there's now a vendor who has a mature enough solution that we don't have to continue doing all that research on our own, right? Maybe, Databricks agent or the, AWS agent for that matter are already mature enough, but now we know how to evaluate them. We know what are the issues we have with the data. We know what type of experiences we want to create. We have benchmarks, right? So we have data and queries and outcomes that we run on our own that we can test a third-party solution with, and then know if it's up to par, or even compare the different solutions that we have to choose the best one for us. So eventually this all comes down to, from a senior leadership perspective, to controlled risk, right? And that's what they care about, right? They want to make sure that when they invest money, they can get the ROI, or they can pull the plug on it at any point in time. And then that reduces the level of risk that they have to take, which makes them much more receptive, right, or willing to actually invest in this project. And like we said, they don't have to invest $1 million upfront, but it is incremental investment. And so there's no sunk cost traps along the way.
Asaf, can you give maybe 1-2 examples for the ROI that you were able to show maybe at the like early stages to get approved to continue with the project, maybe also versus other solutions that you considered in the market?
So let's take this kind of vendor solutions challenge as an example. We started this process out almost a year ago. Okay, at that time, the Databricks Genie was very, very new. Amazon did not have their, I don't even remember what it's called, their kind of SQL agent at the time. They had Amazon Q, which was a complete failure, and they actually rebranded that to not carry that name with them. So there wasn't a good solution out there we could adopt. But over the past 10 months, there have been multiple vendors coming out with this type of natural language to SQL solutions. Our management team is seeing that, right? And they are constantly asking us, guys, is this right for us to continue investing in this research project, given that some vendors are coming out with out-of-the-box solutions? So given this incremental process, and really with the mindset of telling ourselves and the company, we're not here to invent something and sell it as a product. We're here to solve a business problem. We can take the learnings, the benchmarks, the processes that we've done and apply them to be able to vet these types of solutions. So we were actually able to show them how Databricks Genie and how the Amazon solution were not mature enough by leveraging some of our benchmarks and giving them actual examples, okay? But if any of them were good enough for our needs, at that point in time, it was much easier for us to make that choice and actually go out and purchase them and maybe stop the work that we're doing or continue that as a learning experience to improve how we use third-party solutions. I think I already talked about that data finder, right? So the servicing BI team that we have is a team of 8 people, And if you think about it, 20% time from 8 people is 1.5 people. Full time, just answering questions of what data do we have and who owns that data. So with that data finder bot, we were able to immediately eliminate that waste and have them actually go out and work on ad hoc requests. And this is something that did not only reflect on kind of the budget bottom line, it immediately impacted senior stakeholder experience and perception, because senior leaders were always frustrated with how long it takes for ad hoc BI analysis to happen. That kind of lag time or processing time was a result of having maybe one person be available to do ad hoc analysis, and now they had 2.5 or 3 people doing ad hoc analysis. So they immediately saw the cycle times being shortened in that type of request, which is most of the experience that they have working directly with those teams. So that's the kind of ROI that we saw along the way that we are already able to measure and prove. So this is kind of the high level of how we structured the project. And as I said, allowed us to be very flexible, allowed us to get very strong buy-in from management. When you show a manager this kind of controlled risk line, they really, really like it. So it really resonates with them, and they really appreciate that mindset. And really us understanding their constraints, right, and their anxieties as leaders, right, that have budgets and they need to figure out where to allocate that budget and making sure that they're not spending money in places that are not going to yield ROI. At this point, I want to give you some high level of the technical solution. This is going to be maybe another maybe 5 to 7 minutes, and then we can do a pause and maybe take some questions from the audience. So obviously, first of all, the question is, why do you want to build this yourself, right? You have so many tech companies that can build this for you, or they're building generic solutions, then you can take them on. And so why doesn't ChatGPT, right? Or why doesn't a generic solution in some BI platform work? Well, the first answer is because you can't just dump data and expect that to work, right? Even if you're a BI platform and you push the data into the BI platform, the metadata, the context, right? How to join that, the business interpretation of what people ask and what it means, that is context that a BI platform does not have. It is very, very hard to push that as just kind of a, look at this document and get context from it if you're a ChatGPT or something like that. So that doesn't work. But even if the problem is very, very specific and very focused, it does not guarantee that the LLM will understand the schema properly, okay? And specifically, we know that LLMs are very bad at inferring joins. They're very bad at decoding shorthand, and a lot of, data schemas have acronyms, right? Or for some reason, people remove all the vowels out of words because it makes for shorter column titles. It's very, very hard for a generic LLM to understand that if you don't give it enough context. And eventually, governance is non-negotiable, right? It's very hard to take a ChatGPT experience or even a Power BI experience and control it in a very clear way, right? So those are all the things that prevented us, or that we kind of experimented with and very quickly realized that that's just not going to work. And we realized that we have to build something on our own, or at least wait for a long time until someone solves it in a generic enough way. But that is something that we wanted to get started on right away. So overall, the architecture, I don't think it's going to be very kind of novel to most people, but data and metadata obviously is the ground for anything. We just created 4 basic agent types. So there's the metadata agent, right? The one that understands and is able to articulate the right metadata. The SQL agent that actually does the natural language to SQL generation. The RAG agent, reminding you, that goes into certified reports that have been vetted and tries to find if there's an existing report that can answer the problem or the question that you're asking. And then eventually what we call the BI agent, which takes all that information and formulates that to a proper business answer, depending on who's interacting with it, whether it's an analyst or an executive. On top of that, there is governance and trust, and orchestration, and eventually, obviously, some contextual user interface. The way that the workflow works is as such. A user comes in, presents a business question, and then an orchestrator kicks into motion. The orchestrator, as a first step, leverages the metadata agent, which interacts directly with the catalog, basically to understand what is this person asking me, right? Understanding different ways of how to formulate that, synonyms of business terms, whether they're not using the precise business terms, identifying what that is, and eventually, figuring out what they want me to do. And that's a next step to figuring out what data I need to pull. So this is when the RAG agent kicks into motion. We're trying to find if there is a certified report available. If there is, we pull it. If there isn't, that's when the SQL agent kicks into motion and tries to execute a query against the databases. And again, this is all completely orchestrated by the kind of orchestrator agent. At this point in time, we assume that we have the data. We either have just the raw data or some kind of certified report that also brings together with it the schemas that are feeding that report. And at this point, we're pushing that into the BI agent, which basically takes all that data and figures out how to answer the specific question that was asked. Okay, this is kind of that generation state of the workflow, and that can translate to a textual answer, that can translate to creating a chart, that can also translate to a link that basically says, hey, this is the certified report that contains the information that you need. Go there, and if you can't find the information that you need, here is the person that owns this report or this dashboard, and they can help you more. This is where some of that corporate context comes into play, and that's where we decide how we exactly want to serve the person that came in, which creates the final answer. There is also potentially kind of that override that says, if we're in a conversational situation, then I don't have to rerun this thing back to back. We have kind of 10 minutes left, so there is more here, but I don't want to go into it. I want to stop at this point and give people the opportunity to ask questions. I don't know, Boaz, if you can help organize that, or if you just want to allow people to open mics. I'm here for anything.
Guys, I think you can open your mics. There were a few questions. If not, I will. Anat was asking, can you share the scale challenges that you encountered in production? Is it in compute, storage, or both?
So the amount of data that we have roughly 2,000 schemas that we manage across the company. Obviously, we didn't start with that. The servicing area has roughly 30 different schemas coming from multiple platforms. We count it primarily by the number of schemas, because really the number of rows doesn't really matter. I mean, we don't care too much about compute at this point in time. It's more about the data complexity. So that's how we counted it for now. The kind of discovery sprint was just on Adobe Analytics data, which consisted of 2 schemas. So that made it much easier for us. But that's the overall scale that we're facing now. When we do scale it up, we don't plan on giving one BI agent access to all the company data and expect it to make sense of it. We're going to heavily segment that based on business domains. And generally speaking, the servicing is one of the more complex and more data-intensive one across the different domains. So we are already kind of operating at the, let's say, 80% scale that we're expecting to.
Ofer was asking how long was the length of this project?
So we're already, we kind of kicked off the strategic part of this almost a year ago. We got corporate buy-in and budgeting around February, and we've been researching that ever since. There have been a couple of pauses, but as of now, we've run 4 6-week sprints, and each sprint was focused on a different kind of area of research. So overall, we're already about 8 months into the research phase. And as I said, we already delivered 2 production-grade applications, which are deployed in a very limited scope in the servicing department. And I can kind of quickly come back to this just so let me have it. So these are the 2, I'm sorry. The kind of the metadata white paper, as I said, it's not a production grade application, but it's something that impacted other initiatives in the company. And the data finder, bot owner, and the reports finder are the 2 applications that are already deployed.
I have a question also about the interactivity that you're aiming for. Is this a tool for getting an answer and that's it, or for getting the query, the report, the interpretation, and being able to play with it? And do users expect that to do that interactively, or you put in a query today and come back tomorrow?
Yeah, so we have no intention of building a data code assistant, right? We're using Databricks Assistant, and we're using Databricks Genie, or we're actually testing Databricks Genie these days to see how good it is. This is intended to serve primarily, let's say, product people and business people. So less technical people than the analysts themselves. For data practitioners, we see kind of GitHub Copilot and Databricks Assistant as more powerful tools. We are looking for ways on how to enrich the context of Databricks Assistant with these metadata layers and context that we know how to generate here. It's not very straightforward, but it's also something we are working with the Databricks team about, because they also realize this, and they're trying to figure out ways of how to create, let's say, APIs or MCPs into other platforms that store that type of context. So if it's a catalog system or if it's a semantic layer system, those are things that we're currently partnering with Databricks on. And at this point in time, it's just very hard for us to push this type of context to that tool. I think even when we are able to solve that, because that's a primarily technical challenge that we'll probably overcome, the fact that we can orchestrate multi-step agent processes by building something in-house is very important, because the Databricks Assistant, by the way, also GitHub Copilot, they're not very good at giving you control over multi-step processes. So if you can execute a task with a single prompt, they're very, very good at it. But if you need the system to follow a very specific predefined set of steps, it's very, very hard for us to get them to do exactly what we want in that scenario. Again, down the line, they might start implementing, agentic processes that we can define. They don't have it yet. And even I think OpenAI is just getting started with that.
Did you use any framework for the orchestration, building the agents?
I think we just use the basic LangChain and LangGraph, some of those open sources. There wasn't something specific. For the agents, we started using Crew AI. It's good. It's super basic, okay, but it does simplify some stuff. We're now exploring Agent Core, so we're getting some early access to Agent Core from AWS. It seems okay. Again, early stage, everyone is. So it gives you some stuff, more connectivity to Bedrock, I think, is the main thing there. And just a simplification of the stack itself. So, serverless capabilities, stuff like that. But we had to write a lot of code in the orchestration layer to control how information flows, I guess, right? And how we activate the different types of agents along the way.
George is asking. Sorry, go ahead.
Hi, I have a question about scaled production. I don't know if anyone heard ask because I had some connectivity issues, but moving to production, what capacity of documents you think you will need to process at real time? And the vector DB sizes, do you see any challenges with the tools that you're currently working with?
Yeah, so I think we answered it, but very briefly, we're measuring the complexity of production scale in the number of schemas that we want to be able to handle at any given moment. Each one of those schemas has context in the catalog, and we're using Calibra for now. And so all the metadata and all the business context is stored in Calibra. The main challenge, and I'll come back to the architecture slide with that, is in this metadata agent. So figuring out what information we need to pull. And if we need to pull more than one schema, what's the right way of joining that data? Once we create a view of the data, that's when the rest of the pipeline goes into motion, and that's how we control for complexity. So right now we're at kind of 80% complexity, and we're talking about roughly 30 different schemas. The messiness of the data, the metadata coverage and context varies between them, but that's currently where we are right now. We care less about compute at this point in time.
George is asking, will there be guardrails in place to prevent sensitive data from leaking when asked business-related questions? How will that flow?
Absolutely. So every step of the way, right? It starts with the login and it ends with the BI agent. So in every step of the way, we apply some form of guardrails to make sure that we're getting only the data that we can, that we are understanding it correctly, that we're basically managing the process, we're giving information that we allow the system to give. So as I said, a possible outcome of this BI agent is that it basically says, go and talk to someone else. That's part of the guardrails that we're building there. So yes, of course.
Thanks.
Thank you all for joining today. You are welcome to ask follow-up questions on the WhatsApp group. Asaf is there, and I hope you found the link. And it will be great if we will continue those discussions there as well to get.
Yeah, I'm just gonna quickly flashing my details if you wanna get it. So my LinkedIn, my name, Multineer is a website for an open source project that I'm building now, so you can visit that as well. Happy to chat to anyone.
Thank you all.
Okay, guys. Thank you for having me. Have a great day.